worry, it's tea. I just wanted to be senselessly dramatic. Hey there, I'm Jane, and welcome to my YouTube channel and my very messy little sewing corner. I'm not going to spend much time talking here because I'm assuming that you've already watched my first video about making my robe à la francaise. If you haven't, I will go ahead and throw that up there. You'll be able to find it. I believe in you. As per usual for my 18th century projects, I will be using two main resources. The first one being the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking, and the other being Patterns of Fashion 1. There's more in the title, but that's all you really need to know. I will link them below in the description if you're interested. I recommend them both. They're both great. So we're just going to start with the sleeves here, and this is where things kind of started to go wrong and I made some mistakes, and then I had to figure out how to solve them somehow. I started out by making the sleeve pattern as directed in the American Duchess Guide. These actually turned out pretty okay, but they were definitely a bit loose and baggy on me. I was browsing through my Patterns of Fashion 1 and I noticed that it was standard practice to make the sleeves of a sacque gown with a curved seam along the back to make the sleeve tighter and less wrinkly. And I thought, why not? Less wrinkly and more form-fitting, more authentic? That sounds great. Or, so I thought. Like Icarus, I got too confident and flew too close to the sun. So I unpicked the seam I had just done and then drew a new curved seam and backstitched the sleeve together that way. And then repeated the same process for the silk check fabric. I inserted the lining into the fashion fabric shell, wrong side to wrong side, and the bottom seam allowance of the lining was trimmed off. The taffeta was folded over twice, over the lining, and then hem stitched down. Then, of course, it was time for the sleeve ruffles. I used the general pattern from a 1770s sacque gown that I've been using as inspiration for this gown from Patterns of Fashion 1. I freehanded this a bit, sort of just transferring the pattern in the book to some pattern paper with my eyes and some measurements, and then cut the sleeve ruffles out of the fashion fabric with pinking shears. I pinned them together in order of size, so smallest to largest, and then folded over the seam allowance at the top. I then gathered the ruffles with whip gathering stitches. Continuing to follow the notes in Patterns of Fashion 1, I mounted the ruffles to a piece of twill tape, folding it over to enclose the raw edge. I probably should have skipped the folding of the twill tape part, but that's what I decided to do, so I'm going to report on it. The ruffles were attached to the inside of the sleeve at the bottom of the hem with more hem stitching. However, on the next fitting, the problems became very clear with this plan. My propensity to have small meltdowns was also apparent. There was a big old gap at the back shoulder, sort of under the armpit, because while resizing and messing with the pattern, I didn't make the back of the shoulder cap large enough or the right shape. Instead of wasting fabric by cutting out two new sleeve pieces, I cut out a crescent-shaped blob and prick-stitched the taffeta patch onto the gap. Then I tried on the gown real quick to make sure it would solve my issue. Okay, so I stitched on the sleeves with an extra piece on it, sort of like an underarm gusset. You can't see from the inside, but yeah. So they're stitched on, and well, I can kind of see the stitching along there. That's fine, well and good. I tried it on. It does go on over my clothes. But now we have these holes on each side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of the linen I use for lining. So there's that big stash, and there's also this little bit. I'll probably use the bit because that looks like perfect amount. And I'm just gonna loosey-goosey, super chaotic, stitch it in right there. I'll pin it in first on the model so that I can kind of see what I'm doing. I also trim this a bit, but I'm gonna stitch in the lining piece of the gusset just to whatever fits and still allows like movement to cover all these raw edges. I had to depart from the American Duchess and what they recommend, even what Janet Arnold recommended, and just sort of do what I knew would work using piecing and sort of like fitting techniques. So I might turn over some of this. It might just get done in sections. It's fine. A lot of garments pre-industrial era just look like absolute chaos on the inside. So it'll be maybe even a little bit more authentic. So yeah, that's what I'm up to right now. I then folded in the seam allowance on the lining patch and used a hem stitch to carefully attach it to the back underarm area of the lining. But it was time to finish the straps. So I cut out the shoulder straps from the taffeta with a generous seam allowance. Then I pinned the strap onto the shoulders, trying my best to get it as even as possible, although it did not come out that way. And then I just used an applique stitch and prick stitch to get them attached. After this bit of a failure that, eventually got solved, I really wanted to focus on a different area for a while, so I decided to finish the hem of the gown. I also trimmed off the excess from the hem just to soften the shape and get rid of the weird corners that formed near the skirt seams. The American Duchess recommends doing this with a faced hem if the gown has a train, and mine has a little baby one because I'm rather tall, so I decided to just do the hem facing. So I measured the total circumference of the hem and then pieced together 3 strips of taffeta from leftovers I had from cutting other pieces. I meant for it to be 10 inches wide, but I must have mismeasured something while cutting because the shortest width of the strips ended up being 8 inches after accounting for seam allowance, which, considering that the train of my gown isn't very long, 8 inches is perfectly fine. After trimming off the extra couple of inches, I basted the seam allowance on all sides. I also took a second to baste the hem on the actual gown. To attach the facing to the hem, I first used a really tiny running stitch along the bottom and top edges of the rectangle, and then a hem stitch along the shorter sides. For the entire process, I wanted to be sure that the visible stitch on the outside of the gown was as small as possible. And with this finished, the gown is fully constructed and it's time for the more fun but also very tedious part, the trimmings. Calculating the most efficient way to cut the necessary trim for this gown took a while and I suffered a lot for it. I used a yard of fabric and had to calculate how many iterations of the width and length would fit in this 36 by 59 rectangle. Please like and subscribe to honor my sacrifice of doing math. I decided on 2.5 inches wide for the sleeve trim, 3 inches wide for the neckline trim, and a double gathered trim that would be 6 inches wide in total. So I cut out all the trim with pinking shears and then pressed the narrow widths into half and divided the 6-inch trim into 3 parts. I started out with the shortest lengths of trim, gathering them with a whip stitch. These were then pinned to the hem of the sleeve to languish on Darla the dress form while I worked on the other bits of trim. The process was repeated for the neckline trim, except I ended up with somehow a bit left over, just due to how the math works and that I wouldn't need an entire strip for the last bit. The double gathered trim was pretty much the same, except there are 2 differences. First, I was so tired by this point that I started gathering with running stitches to make it go faster. And then secondly, this one has 2 gathering lines, so I did them simultaneously with 2 different threaded needles. This trim would only be attached on the front skirts of the gown. After the trim is gathered, it gets pressed with an iron to make it lie flat. Then, after finally purchasing my extra ribbons, I got to play around with fun extras to add as well. After spending a little too long on a random blog post I found, which I'll also link below because it's actually very excellent, learning how to tie pretty bows, I made 2 double loop bows for the sleeve hems out of the burgundy satin ribbon, and 10 single loop bows out of the gold organza ribbon for the double gathered trim. So I've tied and made some nice little satin bows, and I'm applying them to the crook of the arm. I've already done this one. Oops, glare. I'm going to tack it on from the inside, just with a few stitches, so it's removable if I want it to be, but pretty secure. And finally, the trim is pinned or basted, and then prick stitched to the gown. A lot of gowns from the 1770s or 1780s period had a really delightful, sort of frothy trim, ranging from crocheted lace, bows, rosettes, stuff puffs, and fly fringe. I just decided to stick with whatever extravagant mess I could make with ribbon and pink trim. Here is the progress on the gown. It is so close to being finished. These pieces of trim And yes, I know there's sewing trash over there, and no, I don't want to talk about it. These pieces of trim need to be attached. This one is partially attached. I think I did one side already, and I just started on the other side. Basically, just doing a prick stitch along the two gathering lines. This one is just basted on. I had to baste them because I originally was just pinning them, but the fabric was shifting and I knew it was going to bubble and come out super uneven. So I decided to just sit down and baste it with some easy to see thread. Probably should have pushed the pleats back even further or made one or two really like bigger pleats right next to the pocket so I'd have more space to work with and it wouldn't be as awkward, but you know, it looks really good thus far. You can kind of see, you can't tell that there's a pleat underneath there, it's fine. So I'm gonna do these off camera because it's hard to hold. I have to hold basically the whole gown in my hands while I sew. And it's really, really hard to sew these while still making sure that my work is on camera and everything looks okay on the camera. So I'm just gonna do this off camera and I will come show everyone at the end. And it's really boring sewing anyways, so there is that. Ta-da! So I am held together entirely right now by pins, which is okay. I know you can still kind of see the straps of my stays and also my shift at certain points. That's because this is a Regency era shift and I need to get rid of the stay straps and replace them with something else. But otherwise, I'm extremely happy with how the gown turned out. I will do a turn. Kind of narrow. I'm about as wide as this doorway, so I don't want to like disturb anything too much. Sleeves are a little wonky still, but I feel like you can barely, there's so much fluff and other stuff going on. I feel like it's hard to even know that there was like a little gusset incident, which is right here. It is a little restricting for movement, but not too bad. If I were a lady and all I had to do was like needlepoint or sitting around or lounging or socializing, this is totally enough movement for that. It's easy to raise my arms up this high anyways, so. Yeah, I also, one extra thing just about this outfit in general is that I know I did the blue on the back because I was really scared of running out of this brown taffeta. I totally still had enough brown taffeta to do the back too. So doing the whole blue thing was unnecessary almost entirely. And now I have a whole bunch of brown taffeta and nothing to do with it. I need to work on pinning. That was a little hard for me, but I'm sure I will figure it out with time. But whew, there's a little bit of a train, huh? I literally haven't seen it on myself from that angle. Oof. I can't see it. You're gonna have to tell me it's great from the comments because I'm not gonna be able to see it. Oh gosh, these straps. I wonder if I made the arm side too shallow. It's supposed to be pretty high up in the armpit, but I might have made it too high. That may be part of the problem here. Well, good to know. Yeah, so there's a bunch of like little things, but I think overall I could totally wear this in public and feel really good about it. I don't have shoes to wear it with. I'd have to work on that. But, you know, I mean, look at me. I made an entire 18th century outfit and all it needs is like a lace tucker or a linen tucker. It's just a little ruffle that goes on your neckline. Probably actually cover up the shift very well. And some, I can never remember what they're called, but they're basically just like a few layers of lace that go in right here, which would cover up this twill tape and make it look nice and frothy. So those are probably the next things I'll work on for this, although I think I haven't decided if I'm going to do all the accessories and then take a little break, or if I'm going to take a little break and then do the accessories. You know, they'll get done, but I think this project took a few days off my life at least. But it does feel good to have it on and have it be finished. One more twirl for the camera. some extra swishes. Okay. If you had a good time watching my process here, go ahead and give this video a like, comment, maybe even subscribe to see my future projects. If you especially enjoy the messiness of me explaining my mistakes on camera, go ahead and pop over to my Ko-Fi, buy me a coffee. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to be doing next. I have some Elizabethan stays that are almost finished, like so close to being finished. And I have to do a whole bunch of like little accoutrements, as they say, little accessories for the sack gown look. So might be do a video on that. I have about 14 other major projects planned at the moment. They're on like a to-do list, you know, but it's really cold outside right now. So maybe I will just make a nice simple wool cloak. I think I need to take a break from the really complex projects for a minute and just do something simple. Even if it takes a little while, as long as it's simple, I think I can handle it. Yeah, something simple to like reset my sewing palette, you know? I do my best here to upload a new video during the first week of every month, especially these big project videos. Sometimes I do some smaller ones in between. I don't know, you'll just have to subscribe and find out. Well, I will see you next time. Have a good one.